So the nation currently has a 4.2% unemployment rate. Meanwhile, in some states, it's hard to get a job unless you'll join a union. Our next guest is here to say that's not the way it should be. Mark Mix is president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. Mark, welcome to the show.
John, good to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity to chat a little bit about the truth. How about that?
That is a subject near and dear to my heart. So what prompted you to get involved in the Right to Work movement?
Well, John, it's been a long journey from high school, where I was mentored by an extremely liberal social studies teacher, civics teacher, that kind of convinced me that the idea of communism, socialism, Marxism should be the rule of the day. From a journey into college, learning about individual freedom and individual rights, getting a little more education about kind of who we are as Americans. Growing up a union household, actually, with a stepfather who was a 32-year member of the International Association of Machinists, and a mother who was a union member with the Civil Service Employees Association in New York State, washing dishes in a cafeteria. I was primed to be kind of on the other side. But when I learned about the power that union officials have been granted in America to compel someone to pay them for the right to work, that's when my eyes kind of opened up about individual freedom and liberty. And now for the last 38 plus years, I've committed myself to helping workers protect those individual freedoms that should be part and parcel of this grand experiment in self-government.
Good for you. You know, it is astounding to me that we are even having a conversation about socialism and communism. I mean, when my entire life, those terms were virtually forbidden. I mean, they weren't forbidden because we have freedom of speech, but they were so contrary to our way of thinking and our way of life that we didn't even consider those as possibilities in our great country. Today, however, we find ourselves having to fight socialism and communism at virtually every turn, including in the workplace. What do you think?
Yeah, indeed. You know, we don't have to go back that far in American history to find out kind of the origins of all this. I mean, let's go back to the late 1800s, early 1900s for a gentleman by the name of Samuel Gompers. Samuel Gompers was the father of the American labor movement in America. And in his final speech to the delegates of the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, in El Paso, Texas, Samuel Gompers said this, and this is a profound statement about how unions ought to operate in the United States. He said, "The workers of America adhere to voluntary institutions, that anything that is formed through voluntarism is inherently stronger and will preserve longer than anything that's forced together through compulsion." And Gompers was right about that. He was right about it then. The union movement, unfortunately, went to Congress back in the 1930s and said to the federal government, give us the power to compel ourselves, to compel people to join us and associate with us, and give us additionally the power to force them to pay money for that forced association, and we'll make things right in America. That type of collectivism has spawned what is kind of the basis for this idea that, these private organizations like labor unions have power out of all proportion to the numbers that they claim to represent. And so from the 1930s till today, John, workers in 24 states that don't have right to work laws can lose their job, not because of their performance being the best or the worst, or because of their color being white, black, or yellow, or red, or whatever they are. But if they don't tender dues or fees to a labor union, they will be fired from their jobs. That collectivism is outrageous and really a violation of who we are as Americans, as founded back in our constitutional and Bill of Rights, and the idea to associate. If you don't have the right to associate, you have to have the right not to associate, right? The corollary would prove true. But unfortunately, labor policy in this country is not written that way.
Do you think that labor unions have outlived their usefulness in today's society? I mean, I think if you look back to the early 1900s when people were working in factories and they were required to work very long hours in dangerous conditions, and they did not have a voice, that maybe unions filled a purpose and a role. Have we moved past that as a society today?
Yeah, well, that role, to your point, the idea, people often have this idea that unions were necessary back then, and I agree. Unions are necessary today, and unions will be necessary in the future as workers choose to voluntarily join together to amplify their voice. The problem that we have is there's no place for forced unionism in that evolution of the union movement. But yet, union officials have adopted this power that's granted from the United States Congress or granted from a state legislature to basically have this unique privilege to force themselves on people that didn't ask for, didn't want, and didn't vote for them. So that type of unionism has no place in the American marketplace. That type of unionism is on the decline in the American workplace because employers understand very clearly, John, and you know this, it's common sense. If you don't take care of your employees, they won't take care of you. And pretty soon your business will be struggling because you've decided to ignore the needs and the necessities of the employees that make your business possible. So the idea of this evolution of the business model has improved to the point where, people, the union rate in the private sector in America today is 5.9%. And there's a reason why that is. It's not, union officials would tell you it's because everyone's against unions. That's not the case. The reason is employers are taking care of their employees, knowing that they're one of the most important parts of any business enterprise.
Absolutely, and the free marketplace would be a fine way, in my mind, to encourage companies to treat their employees well. As you point out, I've run a business for 38 years, and one of the hardest jobs that I have is to identify, recruit, hire, train, and retain our employees. And so we do everything we can to be an attractive place to work. And I think that as a consequence, that's why our average tenure in my businesses is over 15 years. And I think that's an important metric for us. We don't want turnover. It's very costly. So why can't private enterprise govern itself in terms of treating its employees fairly?
Well, that's a great question, John, and I don't know if I have the actual answer, the solution to the problem, but let's take the automobile industry in the United States of America. Let's use that as a case study. We've had the quote-unquote big three for all these years, Ford, GM, and then known Chrysler, now known as Stellantis, and they basically had a monopoly on car manufacturing in the United States. So what happened to the American product? It declined in its quality and its value. And the employees in the company said, yeah, look, if we get a union, and United Auto Workers Union organized the automobile business back in 1937, and that legacy continues throughout the whole process. But what happened, to your point, all of a sudden, someone looks around at the American market for automobile manufacturing and say, you know what? There are gross inefficiencies in that market. We can come to the United States and we can make automobiles and we can sell them of higher quality. We can be non-union. We can take care of our employees and we can make Nissan, BMW, Volkswagen, Hyundais, Mitsubishis, all these Volvos, all of these companies have come to the United States. And what happened, John, is that the unionization rate in automobile manufacturing decreased, the quality of the product increased, and there are workers working in right-to-work states manufacturing quality automobiles that are making more money than their brethren, unionized brethren, at the so-called big three, which is now the little three when it comes to market share in the United States.
So how has Elon Musk avoided unionizing in his plants? He's certainly got Fremont and Austin and a plant in New York and others, I'm sure, around the country, Nevada, for instance, for batteries. How has he avoided unionization?
Well, I think the same way that you are, John, is taking care of his employees. I mean, those employees, I think, realize the value proposition of working for a company like Tesla and their battery operation. And apparently Elon Musk does a good job of rewarding them and honoring them. The UAW would have us believe that, they are they're abused and violated. But the fact is they speak for themselves. I mean, that's why only 5.9% of the private sector workforce is unionized. It's not because the unions have been litigated against or regulated against or, the laws have written that unions don't have privilege. They have privileges outstripped what any private business has in the country. Exempt from antitrust laws, exempt from, quote, extortion laws. I mean, they have power and privilege that is unique to their particular proposition, whereas small businesses and businesses like Elon Musk, the one thing they have to do, the one thing that John Gordon has to do is take care of his employees. Otherwise, you're in big trouble. So I think Elon's done that. And the results today that the unions haven't been able to organize Tesla workers or SpaceX workers or X workers is a result of taking care of the employees.
Absolutely. And I think you'd probably find more millionaires that work in Tesla factories than any other of their competitors, because stock options and rewards with stock have been a big part of their culture. So you would think that living in our country, that people who really espouse unions tend to skew more liberal and be more on the left hand side of the political spectrum. Yet the countries that are socialist and communist, like China and Japan, well, I wouldn't say that Japan would be in that boat, and South Korea. So Japan and South Korea, I'm not exactly sure what their form of government is, but it's not communism or socialism, but it might be skewing in that direction. But certainly China, which is a huge competitor of ours in the automobile industry, do they permit unions? Are they unionized?
Yeah, no, well, obviously in a top-down controlled economy like that, I suspect that the government has a real problem with unionization. I mean, the European labor model is one thing that we need to avoid. Unfortunately, there are those in the Republican Party that are kind of intrigued by this European labor model, i.e. sectorial bargaining and union officials getting elevated to board of director seats and things like that have worked and militated against economic development and manufacturing job growth in European countries. Some people want to bring that here. But, the idea of voluntary unionism, getting back to the point that I made earlier, that's the secret to all this. Let employees amplify their voice in the workplace, do that with voluntarism as opposed to compulsion. Compulsion is a component of those tyrannical top-down economies like China, like North Korea, like some of those institutions where, that you do it our way or the highway. But that hasn't worked in America. It doesn't work in America. It will not work in America. And we ought to try to avoid it. And one way we do that is by allowing employees to exercise their rights vis-a-vis right to work laws. The idea that, look, we believe everyone should be able to join a union, but no one should be forced as a condition of employment to pay dues or fees in order to keep a job. So, labor policy is evolving. There's always questions about it. I suggest that the American model of individual freedom and individual rights is highly preferred to kind of that top-down managed economy from, people that think they're a lot smarter than we are, John. And I admit that I'm not that smart, but I think I'm smart enough to know when some elite tells me, just sit back, don't pay attention, just listen, we'll take care of you. That's not a model for success anywhere in the world.
Oh, well, I've agreed with most of what you've said, except the part that you're not very smart. I think you're plenty smart, Mark. But now let me ask you, these 24 states that have not adopted a right to work statute, aren't they losing out terribly? Because I know my home state of Georgia, where we've got a right to work law, and it is a very free market when it comes to labor, has attracted all sorts of manufacturing facilities for cars and trucks. What's the matter with the other 24? Don't they want the industry to come into their state?
Well, they do, John, but it's about politics and it's about money, unfortunately. I mean, I don't know. I couldn't say it in Latin, but the phrase that says follow the money. And I don't know how you say that in Latin, but I'll say it in English. Follow the money. And the politics of it really are important. And you're right. Look, we've got plenty of evidence. The time frame for examining the different economies, whether it be in a right-to-work state like Georgia, that's been voted like one of the top states for businesses for the last, couple of decades by CNBC.
For a long time, for sure.
Virginia just got it this year. They're a right-to-work state. But let me give you some cold, hard facts that are really, you can't argue. Organized labor tries to argue this, but they can't. And that is that manufacturing job growth in right-to-work states over the last decade is 5 times greater in states with right-to-work laws than states that allow forced unionism. Private sector job growth in right-to-work states is double private sector job growth than in forced unionism states. The arguments about automobile manufacturing, there was a time back in the 1970s that everything we got was created in Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Illinois. And now about 80 to 85% of all automobile manufacturing, whether it be original equipment manufacturing or assembling, is occurring in states that have right-to-work laws. So you're exactly right, John. You don't have to look or guess. You just follow the money and you follow the companies and the manufacturing job growth. You'll find it in the states that have right-to-work laws, those 26 states that protect individual freedom and individual rights.
So I've got this hunch, a suspicion, I would say really a prediction, that the humanoid robot is really going to resolve this issue once and for all, because they don't join unions and they don't call in sick and they don't have labor or pay demands or insurance demands. What do you think that the robot and and we're right on the beginning of robots in the workplace, even though a lot of companies are very mechanized, But the idea of a robot replacing humans, I think we're right there at the doorstep of. How is it going to impact the labor force in America?
Yeah, John, if I could give you the answer that would be correct, I would. I'm guessing. But look, I'm a Star Trek fan. I watch Jim Kirk and Spock and Bones and the guys get that Enterprise system through, and we saw a little bit of robots. But you know what we did see? There was still a human in control of major decisions, and so I think Elon Musk has talked about this. He's talked about robots, and we've seen kind of the most advanced manufacturing facilities in the country not only have robots, but they also have humans running those robots, and so the skills needed to be part of the manufacturing industry may change, but there's still going to be, I think, a human component to that. And frankly, I hope there's still a human component to it, because I get a little bit worried when an AI program being tested for, being shut down. I think the other day I was reading about an AI program that they tested it to see what would happen when they tried to shut it down, and finally the AI program started blackmailing the guys that were trying to shut them down. And that famous scene in Space Odyssey 2001, Dave, what are you doing? I worry about that. But I think you're right, John. The continuing cost and the kind of artificial inflation that occurs in manufacturing is going to lead to a solution, because everyone's concerned that manufacturing moved offshore. One of the reasons why that happened is because the cost structure got out of control and we couldn't compete in a global economy. Now we're trying to bring those manufacturing jobs back to the United States. I think we'll be successful in that. But one of the issues is, how can we control the escalating cost of manufacturing? And one of the ways, unfortunately, you do that is by automation. And we got a great example of that in the port industry. Last year, back at the end of the year, the union official of the International Longshoremen's Association said he would strangle the country because they had a monopoly on all of the ports on the East Coast of the United States. And he said the one thing they would not accept was any automation. So literally, the contract that they signed, that President Trump supported, kind of surprisingly, was blocking the automated gate that would let trucks into the port to pick up loads. They had to have a union representative there to open the gate. That's how ridiculous it gets, and that's why we lose jobs and lose competitive advantages that the United States has always had. So there's going to be some of that. The question is, how pervasive is it? I don't know the answer to that, but I still hope that no matter what, there's a human component involved.
I did read that stance and the contract term that you're referring to, and I was astounded by it, because the way to get higher wages is to automate some of the functions, and that's what the robot is designed to do, to eliminate routine, mundane, dangerous, repetitive jobs. But that's really what they're protecting. It's sort of like saying that we're not going to ride in automobiles, we're going to cling to our horse and buggy. That probably didn't work out so well for those folks.
Yeah, time takes its toll. There's no question. But in this contract, John, they got, not only did they get the no automation clause, they got a 66% raise. So I don't know how all that's going to work. I mean, what we do know is that cost will be passed along to the consumer ultimately, and there'll have to be a new way and a new way forward. Maybe some, when we're delivering it by drones, who knows what the future holds. But I know the American entrepreneur, the American spirit will find a workaround. We always do.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of the beauty of the country in that regard.
It's just like when Washington State, or maybe it was Oregon, one of the two, introduced a $15 an hour minimum wage. Within 2 weeks, there were kiosks in every Burger King, and they just didn't have cashiers anymore. They found
yeah, that's right. And we just had another example of that in California, where they raised the hourly rate for restaurant employees, fast food restaurant, quick serve restaurants, to $25 an hour, or $20 an hour. 10,000 jobs were lost immediately. And to your point, technology comes in, and again, they don't call in sick. They do their job consistently, very consistently, interestingly enough. And yeah, so when you get the market out of loop, it tends to fix itself, and this is how it does, unfortunately.
So how do you explain the fact that virtually every business I go into, or every business owner I talk to, says the familiar repetitive refrain is that I cannot find people that want to work, yet we have a 4.3% unemployment rate in America right now. Why can we not absorb those people into the workplace? I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't either, John. And I find that true when I go around the country and visit with small business people. That's the one thing. We can't find anyone that wants to work.
Right.
And that doesn't make any sense. I mean, I guess the problem is they're finding a way to survive through government, stimulus or through government transfer payments. We're making it profitable, or not profitable, but livable, to basically sit home on a couch and as opposed to going to work. And I think most Americans, want to have something to do. They want to invest in working. They want to invest in bettering themselves. But it is a surprise. And the unions would argue right now we're having a riot in Los Angeles about this very issue, about having these illegals stay here because they're the only ones that will do this work, and no one in America wants to do these jobs. Well, I think the first way you get Americans to do this work is to shut off the transfer payments and force them to go to work. I think that's biblical.
I think bingo has just been called. You are so right. And you watch these people that are rioting and burning in Los Angeles, and Maxine Waters and some of these national political people that, and the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, are saying, oh, these protests are not violent. To me, they are making President Trump's case every minute that they're on television. That is the rioters and the people that are trying to burn the city down, because they're carrying Mexican flags and they're rioting and looting and burning. I mean, does that not just sort of sum up the case, President Trump's case in and of itself? I mean, what more information do we need?
Yeah, indeed. And I think, most Americans see that picture, John, that you're talking about, and they recognize what's going on here. The unions have made it a cause celeb because apparently the president of the SEIU, California Union, was quote, arrested for impeding the operations of federal agents trying to conduct their mission, what they're doing. And of course, the big issue came out, free him. He did get freed on Monday with a $50,000 bail, but this is a bigger issue than union power. This is about a Trump promise to basically secure the border and clean up the immigration mess that was created over the last 4 years. And while he's doing that, these people are somehow making it out that, oh yeah, this is just regular people. They're not. They're illegals. They violated the law, and we've got to enforce the law in this country. If we don't have a rule of law, then we see what we have in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
and a governor out there who's just completely out of touch.
The liberals say, well, they're not lawbreakers. They're just hardworking Americans. The fact of the matter is they're illegal hardworking Americans, if that's the case, and they came here illegally and they broke the law in order to do so. Mark Mix, thank you for coming on The Truth. President of the National Right to Work Committee. We appreciate the good work that you're doing, and we appreciate your time today here on The Truth. Come back soon and often.
I'll do it, John. Pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Stay with us. We're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We also come to you on CDM Press simulcast, and on the web. We are on Twitter, X, Facebook, YouTube, Getter, Rumble, and you can also catch us on johngordon.tv. Today's broadcast is brought to you by Perfect Circle Renewable Energy. They're an Atlanta-based company servicing restaurants in North Georgia. They have excellent service. If you're a restaurant owner and you're tired of poor service and poor communication with your vendor, look up PCRenergy.com on the World Wide Web.